The day they demolished my great-grandfather's bridge, I made the decision to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into nothing more than a muddy parking lot. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sipping coffee on my dock when the sound of diesel engines rumbled in the distance. Through the misty morning, I saw a bulldozer approaching the stone bridge my great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1923, the same bridge that had connected our community for a century. But to some power-hungry HOA president, it was an eyesore. What Linda Prescott and her fancy HOA board didn't understand about water rights in Texas was simple. My great-grandfather didn't just build that bridge, he controlled the dam. And I had just inherited something far more powerful than any HOA regulation: the legal right to drain their entire lake. So, drop a comment. What would you do if someone destroyed your family's legacy? And where are you watching from? I want to know how many of you have faced off with these HOA tyrants. I'm Jake Morrison, a civil engineer. 3 months ago, I inherited the most beautiful lakefront property you could imagine. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, built our family cabin in 1920, right after returning from the Great War. But the real gem was the bridge. Sam didn't just slap together some planks. He hand-cut limestone blocks from the local quarry to build a stone arch bridge that connected our side of the lake to the main road for 100 years. That bridge served everyone: fishermen heading to their spots, kids walking to swimming holes, neighbors helping one another. It was the heart of our little community. When I inherited the place, my wife Sarah and I had big plans. We'd been saving every penny, dreaming of retiring there in a few years. I'd fix up the cabin, maybe do some consulting work from home, and spend my mornings fishing off that old dock. The creak of those weathered planks under my boots was like a lullaby. Then, Linda Prescott showed up. Linda's the type of woman who wears pearls to the grocery store and drives a pristine white BMW that's never touched a dirt road. She moved into the Whispering Pines luxury community across the lake 2 years ago, a fancy development that sprouted up like mushrooms after rain. Within 6 months, she maneuvered her way to the HOA presidency. I should have known trouble was coming when I received that first certified letter, the kind with an official weight that makes your stomach sink before you even open it. Inside was Linda's sugary sweet letterhead, declaring that my bridge violated community architectural standards and had to go. I actually laughed out loud. My bridge was built when her development was still a cow pasture, but Linda had done her homework, or so she thought. The letter cited HOA covenant number 47B, architectural review requirements, and threatened me with $500 a day in fines if I didn't remove the bridge within 30 days. That's when I started searching through my grandfather's attic, going through musty old papers that smelled like dust and time, but were legal documents nonetheless. I found the original survey maps, the deed records, and most importantly, the grandfathering clause that specifically protected existing structures. My bridge was older than the HOA itself by 8 decades. Armed with this evidence, I showed up to the next HOA meeting at the community center. You know the smell: the waxed floors, stale coffee, and a faint scent of disappointment. That was my introduction to HOA politics. I spread my papers across the folding table like I was playing a winning hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Linda barely looked at my documents. Her response still makes my blood boil. "Times change, Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice," she said, with a condescending smile, as though she were explaining basic math to a child. The board's vote was inevitable, 5-2 in favor of enforcement. Linda's allies, all newcomers with more money than sense, outnumbered the old-timers who still remembered what community meant. As I walked back to my truck after the meeting, the gravel crunching under my feet, I realized something important. This wasn't about architectural standards or community vision, it was about power. Linda saw my humble bridge, my rundown cabin, and my beat-up truck, and decided I didn't fit her vision for an upscale neighborhood. She wanted me gone. Sarah tried to stay hopeful. "We'll tackle this together," she said at dinner, squeezing my hand across our little kitchen table. "The law is on your side." I nodded and smiled, but deep down, I wondered if simply being right would be enough. What I didn't yet realize was that Linda had chosen the wrong engineer to mess with. See, I wasn't just familiar with building codes and property law, I knew a lot about water. Linda didn't waste time moving from threats to action. 3 days after the board meeting, I was heading out to work when I noticed 2 guys in matching polo shirts standing near my property line. Security guards, at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. "Good morning, gentlemen," I called out, coffee mug in hand, lost. The older one, built like a retired linebacker, pulled out a clipboard. "HOA compliance patrol, sir. We're documenting violations." I almost choked on my coffee. "Violations? Like what?" I asked. "The grass exceeds the HOA standard of 3 inches in multiple areas. The dock needs repainting per aesthetic guidelines. The storage shed requires pressure washing." He rattled off this list like it was a shopping list. Over the next 2 weeks, these guys wrote me up for everything short of breathing too loudly. My mailbox, apparently, was the wrong shade of black. My welcome mat was non-compliant in size. They even cited me for having a fishing net visible from the road. By week 3, I was staring down $1,200 in fines. That's when I did what any good engineer does when faced with a problem. I started investigating the system. It turned out Linda's husband, Rick, owned Prescott Security Solutions. How cute, right? The HOA was paying her husband's company at $3,000 a month to harass homeowners into compliance. I spent an evening on the state contractor licensing website and discovered something interesting. Rick's security license had expired 6 months ago. He'd been operating illegally this entire time. Here's a helpful tip for you: HOA security in Texas must be licensed just like any private security firm, and most aren't. Always check their credentials before letting them fine you for violations. But I wasn't done digging. I called in a favor from a buddy who does commercial inspections. The next Saturday, we took a little walk around Linda's pristine property. Her deck extension. No permits. Her pool house. Built 6 feet over the setback line. That fancy Japanese garden she boasted about. According to the original survey I'd found, it extended 3 feet onto my property. Linda had been trespassing for 3 years. The following Monday, I filed complaints with the state licensing board about Rick's security company and requested a full survey of the property line. I didn't make a spectacle of it. Just handled it like any engineering problem: document everything, follow proper procedures, and let the facts speak for themselves. Linda's response was predictable. Within a week, I began hearing murmurs at the hardware store. Jake Morrison's been difficult to deal with. He's lowering property values with that ugly bridge. Some people just don't understand progress. Sarah came home from the grocery store one Thursday, looking frustrated. The cashier barely made eye contact, she said, and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop acted as if I had the plague. That's when the anonymous complaints started rolling in. Someone called the county, claiming my bridge was structurally unsafe. Another tipster reported that I was dumping chemicals in the lake, which was ridiculous since I'm an environmental engineer who tests water quality for a living. But here's where Linda made her first real mistake. While she was busy playing neighborhood politician, I was doing what I do best: reading technical documents. I'd submitted a public records request for anything related to water rights and dam operations on our lake. What I found in those dusty county files made me sit up straight in my kitchen chair. There were maps I'd never seen before, showing water flow patterns from the 1920s, engineering reports from my great-grandfather's era, and most importantly, documentation of something called secondary water rights that had never been transferred to the HOA. That weekend, I walked around the lake with a surveyor's eye, paying close attention to how the water moved. The resort Linda had been bragging about, the one that was supposed to elevate the community, had a serious vulnerability. Their entire operation relied on consistent water levels. Their boat docks, lakefront dining, and million-dollar water features all depended on the lake staying exactly where it was. The smell of diesel fuel still lingered from their construction equipment, and I could taste the irony. Linda had been so focused on my little stone bridge that she'd never bothered to consider the bigger picture. I drove home that evening with a newfound understanding of the situation. Linda thought she was playing chess, moving her HOA pieces around the board to force me out, but she didn't realize I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. I was the guy who understood how the water worked. Linda's next move came with all the subtlety of a freight train. One Tuesday morning, while I was in my home office, I heard trucks pulling up outside. Not just one, but 3 county vehicles, and a man in a hard hat carrying the kind of clipboard that makes your heart sink. Jake Morrison. The inspector seemed like he'd rather be somewhere else. "Anonymous tip about structural concerns with your bridge," he muttered. "I'm here to conduct a safety evaluation." An anonymous tip. Huh. I could practically smell Linda's expensive perfume hanging in the morning air. The inspection dragged on for 4 hours. The poor guy crawled over every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework with calipers and moisture meters. When he finished, he had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison, your bridge is as solid as the day it was built." But then he checked his clipboard. Current code requires seismic reinforcement for structures of this size. The estimated cost for compliance is at $3,000. You have 10 days to submit improvement plans, or we'll have to condemn it. $3,000 for earthquake protection in Texas, where the biggest seismic event in recent memory was when they blasted rock for a new highway. Ridiculous. But here's where Linda got crafty. The inspector handed me a business card along with the citation. "Prescott Construction can handle the work," he said. "Rick Prescott quoted me $12,000. Says he can have it done in a week." I stared at that business card like it was a snake. Rick Prescott, Linda's husband, offering to fix the problem his wife had created for $12,000. What a coincidence. That evening, I made a few calls. First to the State Contractor Licensing Board, where a helpful woman named Maria pulled up Rick's file. "Sir, Prescott's contractor license expired 24 months ago. He's not legally allowed to perform construction work for hire." Next, I called my buddy at the county building department. "Jake, that seismic requirement only applies to new construction and major renovations. Existing structures are grandfathered unless they're unsafe." Here's your second knowledge nugget. Water rights in the American West often predate modern property law. They can override HOA rules, zoning laws, and even sometimes eminent domain. Armed with this new info, I dug deeper into the water rights documents. What I found in the county archives made my hands shake. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge and a cabin, he'd held secondary water rights to the entire lake system. Granted, back when this area was still ranch land, those rights included something called flow management authority. In simple terms, I had the legal right to control how much water stayed in the lake. I spent the next 2 days studying engineering reports from the 1920s dam construction. Fascinating stuff. The original engineers had built bypass channels to redirect water around the main dam. My great-grandfather's bridge wasn't just for transportation, it was strategically positioned to control a secondary spillway system. Meanwhile, Linda was busy playing her little reputation game. Somehow, she'd convinced 3 of my neighbors that I was unstable and a potential danger. I came home one evening to find new security cameras pointed directly at my property from 2 different houses. Sarah noticed first. "Honey, Mrs. Rodriguez won't even wave anymore," she said. And Tom at the marina acted like I had the plague when I stopped for bait. The breaking point came when Linda filed for a restraining order, claiming I had made threatening statements about the dam and posed a clear and present danger to the community. The judge glanced at her evidence consisting only of my public records requests and my questions at HOA meetings and tossed it out. But the damage had already been done. Half the neighborhood now thought I was some kind of unhinged domestic terrorist. Then I made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing the resort's environmental impact study, I noticed something in the fine print. Their bank loan had very specific conditions regarding water levels. If the lake dropped below a certain depth, their entire $4 million loan would become immediately due. The resort's grand opening was just 3 months away. Deposits had already been taken for weddings, corporate retreats, fishing tournaments. Linda's family had invested $500,000 of their own money into the project. That night, as I sat in my kitchen, staring at those loan documents, I had a sudden realization. Linda thought she was fighting a battle over HOA rules and property aesthetics. But she had picked a fight with someone who understood the one thing her entire development relied on. Water doesn't care about HOA bylaws. It follows the laws of physics and legal precedent. And I was starting to realize that I had more power than any HOA president ever could. The metallic taste of stress had been my constant companion for weeks. That night, however, the taste of stress was replaced by something entirely different, the taste of possibility. Linda's patience finally snapped the week before Thanksgiving. As I checked my mailbox, I saw her striding across the street in her absurd white heels, clutching another manila envelope as if it contained the key to world domination. Morrison, her voice was as sharp as broken glass. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. Your bridge presents an immediate safety hazard that cannot wait for normal procedures. She shoved the envelope at me with such force that I nearly got a paper cut. Inside was a notice for a crisis intervention meeting set for the following evening. The agenda was straightforward: vote to authorize the immediate removal of my bridge, with or without my consent. The meeting itself was a circus. Linda had brought in her golf buddy from Dallas, someone claiming to be a structural engineer who had never seen my bridge, but was quick to label it a death trap. His presentation was full of phrases like catastrophic failure risk and imminent public danger. Real professional stuff. The vote was swift and unforgiving, 7-1 in favor of removal. The only dissenting vote came from Mrs. Chen, an 80-year-old who'd been living here since the 1960s. Everyone else had either been bought off, intimidated, or convinced that I was some kind of deranged bridge builder. Contractor will begin tomorrow morning, Linda announced. Her voice barely hiding her satisfaction. Removal fees of $15,000 will be added to Mr. Morrison's account. If payment isn't made within 30 days, a lien will be placed on the property. $15,000 to tear down something my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I drove home in a daze, the rough feel of the steering wheel the only thing grounding me. Sarah took one look at my face and silently poured 2 glasses of wine. That night, I did something I had never done in my engineering career. I filed an emergency injunction in county court. Not because I was confident it would work, but because I had no other options left. The hearing was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. The following morning, exactly when Linda's contractor was supposed to start demolishing the bridge. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m., carrying a box full of documents, water rights records, contractor licensing violations, evidence of HOA fund mismanagement, and structural reports proving my bridge was safer than most county roads. Judge Martinez listened for exactly 12 minutes before making his decision: emergency injunction granted. A 30-day temporary restraining order issued. Morrison, you have 1 month to resolve this matter through proper legal channels. I called Linda from the courthouse parking lot. Demolitions canceled, I told her. You might want to let your contractor know. The silence on the other end stretched for so long that I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke. This is war, Mr. Morrison. I hope you understand that. Mike, here's knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency injunctions can halt HOA actions if you can show immediate, irreversible harm. But you need documented proof, not just anger. That afternoon, I stumbled upon something that made Linda's declaration of war seem almost quaint. While reviewing HOA financial records, public documents, mind you, I noticed some intriguing discrepancies. Over the past year, Linda had authorized $30,000 in legal consultations and emergency contractor services. Every payment had gone to businesses owned by either her husband or her brother-in-law. I spent the weekend playing forensic accountant, cross-referencing each payment with business licenses and corporate filings. Linda hadn't just used HOA funds to harass me, she'd been treating the community's money like her personal slush fund. But the real breakthrough came when I found the original engineering survey of the lake, dating back to 1923. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge, he positioned it as a control structure for what the old documents referred to as secondary flow management. The bridge wasn't just there to cross the water, it was part of a larger water control system that included the main dam. I spent hours studying those old blueprints, the musty smell of ancient paper filling my kitchen as I traced the water flow patterns with my finger. The more I learned about the original design, the clearer it became that Linda had made a catastrophic mistake. She thought she was up against a stubborn working-class guy. But my great-grandfather had been the chief engineer overseeing the entire lake system. He had designed redundancy and control into every structure, including his bridge. That Sunday evening, I called my former professor from A&M, an expert in historical water rights law. After I explained the situation, he paused for a long moment. "Jake," he finally said, "if what you're telling me is true, you don't just own a bridge. You control water management for the entire lake system. This isn't an HOA issue anymore. This is federal water rights law." I hung up and walked out to my dock. The sharp, clean taste of November air filled my lungs, carrying the scent of the approaching winter. For the first time in months, I smiled. Linda had declared war, but she had no idea what kind of weapons I was about to bring to the fight. Over the next 6 hours, the lake dropped exactly 18.5 inches. By sunset, the resort's million-dollar boat docks were sitting in mud, and their grand opening weekend was officially canceled. That same evening, the bank called their loan. But here's the thing about water, it's patient and fair. Within 24 hours, I had restored normal flow to the lake. The investors, now very eager to negotiate with the person controlling their water supply, made me an offer I could actually respect. "Morrison," said James Chen, the lead investor, "we'd like to propose a partnership. You keep your bridge as a historic landmark, we get guaranteed water levels, and everyone wins." 3 months later, the resort reopened under new management. Linda was long gone. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona after facing federal charges for attempted bribery and misuse of HOA funds. Her husband, Rick, lost his contractor's license permanently and had to sell their house to pay off legal fees. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chen and Tom Rodriguez, established the Morrison Bridge Historic District. My great-grandfather's bridge became the focal point of a community heritage trail that attracted more tourists than Linda's exclusive resort ever could have. Property values didn't plummet like Linda had predicted, they actually went up. Turns out, people prefer living in communities with real history and neighbors who look out for each other. Rather than corporate developments run like private kingdoms, Sarah and I used our newfound local fame to create the Samuel Morrison Water Rights Scholarship for engineering students at Texas A&M. Funded by speaking fees from the dozen water rights conferences where I've shared this story. The scholarship has already helped 5 students pursue environmental engineering. The first recipient was Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter, who aims to specialize in sustainable water management. She'll graduate next spring and has already accepted a position with the State Water Authority. The ceremony was held on the bridge, naturally, with the entire community celebrating together. Tom was promoted to resort manager and rehired all the employees Linda had laid off during her reign of terror. The resort now donates 5% of its profits to local schools and sponsors an annual Bridge Day festival that honors our community's history. Frank Wilson came out of retirement to train me on advanced dam operations. I've since become the official water management consultant for 3 other lake communities dealing with similar HOA issues. It turns out there are plenty of people like Linda, and many forgotten water rights still waiting to be uncovered. The legal precedent we set has been referenced in 12 other federal water rights cases across Texas. Patricia tells me that we've likely prevented dozens of communities from being bulldozed by developers who thought money could trump century-old laws. My bridge is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Every morning, I walk across those limestone blocks my great-grandfather laid with his own hands, and I can almost hear him chuckling, knowing that his water management system saved the day. The resort thrives, the community is stronger than ever, and our little lake has become a model of how development and history can coexist when people choose cooperation over domination. Linda's story became a warning about the dangers of unchecked HOA authority. Just last month, the state legislature passed the Morrison Act, which mandates that all HOA boards must respect existing water rights and historic structures. These are small victories, but they add up. Sarah and I are expecting our first child next spring. They'll grow up running across that old stone bridge, learning to fish from the same dock where I once learned from my grandfather. Some legacies are worth defending, even when the battle seems impossible. The best part: our new neighbors genuinely enjoy having us around. We've become the go-to family for community barbecues. And I've helped 3 different homeowners resolve their own HOA issues without anyone needing to drain any lakes. But if you're facing your own HOA nightmare, remember this: knowledge is power. History matters. And sometimes, the best way to fight bureaucratic bullying is to understand the law better than the bullies do. Drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. I read every one, and I've got plenty of ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that tried to seize an elderly farmer's land through eminent domain, and how century-old mineral rights saved her farm, hit that subscribe button. That story's coming up next. Now, the sound of children's laughter echoes off the old stone bridge, blending with the gentle lapping of water that knows exactly where it belongs. Friday morning brought the kind of chaos that makes you question reality. I was drinking coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's deputies arrived, followed by Linda in her pristine BMW and 2 guys in expensive suits who screamed federal lawyers. Jake Morrison, the lead deputy, said, looking apologetic, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." Environmental terrorism because I exercised legal water rights my family has held for a century. Patricia had warned me this might happen. Within 2 hours, I was bonded out and sitting in her Austin office while she worked her magic with federal authorities. It turns out Linda's Blackstone lawyers had convinced a federal judge that my water rights posed an imminent threat to interstate commerce and environmental stability. The restraining order was sweeping. I couldn't approach the dam, operate any water controls, or even discuss water management publicly. Linda had essentially used the federal court system to neutralize my only leverage. But Patricia smiled as she read the full order. "Jake, they just made a huge mistake. This restraining order officially acknowledged that my water rights exist. It was just temporarily restricting them, which meant federal recognition of my claim." Within 6 hours, Patricia filed her own federal lawsuit under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, asserting a violation of water rights. More importantly, she obtained a counter-injunction that superseded the local restraining order. Federal water rights always trump local criminal complaints, she explained. Linda's lawyers had handed us the exact precedent we needed. Here's a key knowledge nugget: federal enforcement of water rights can override local law enforcement actions when historical claims predate state and local jurisdiction. But Linda wasn't finished with her scorched earth campaign. That afternoon, I learned she'd hired a private security firm to patrol the dam area 24/7, not just any firm. Ex-military contractors who looked like they'd stepped straight out of an action movie. Sarah came home from the grocery store with news that made my stomach sink. "Honey, there are news trucks at the end of our street," and Mrs. Patterson said, "Linda's been telling people you're planning to poison the water supply." Poison the water supply. Linda had officially crossed the line from harassment to full-on character assassination. The media frenzy erupted over the weekend. Local TV stations aired stories about domestic ecotourism and water rights extremism. Linda appeared on 3 different news programs, portraying herself as a concerned community leader protecting innocent families from a dangerous individual with specialized knowledge. But the media attention worked both ways. By Sunday, property rights organizations across Texas were offering their support. Environmental lawyers volunteered their services. Even some resort employees quietly reached out to express their support for my stance. The community began splitting into 2 camps. Longtime residents who remembered my great-grandfather rallied behind our family's history, while newer residents, afraid their property values might plummet, sided with Linda's development vision. On Monday, Linda's move escalated. The whole board called an emergency community protection meeting to authorize any and all measures necessary to stop me from accessing the dam. Essentially, they voted to hire armed guards to prevent me from exercising my federally protected water rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a decision that changed everything. He called me at 6 a.m. with an offer that made my hands tremble. "Jake, I've been running this dam for 30 years. Never seen such a mess over something so simple. I'm retiring immediately, and I'm recommending you as interim dam operator under your water rights authority." Interim dam operator, with federal water rights and official operational authority, Linda's private security couldn't legally stop me from performing routine maintenance, including testing the secondary flow channels. The final piece fell into place when Tom Rodriguez called with information that would destroy Linda's credibility forever. He'd been wearing a wire during his conversations with the sheriff's department, recording Linda's bribery attempts. "Jake, she offered me $15,000 yesterday," Tom said. "She wanted me to make it look like you sabotaged the controls. In exchange, she promised me a promotion and a raise. I've got it all on tape, a $15,000 for false testimony." Linda had crossed the line from civil disputes into federal felony territory. That evening, I sat with Sarah on our dock, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the pilings. The smell of rain hung thick in the air, and I could taste the electricity of the approaching storm. "Tomorrow's the day," I told her. "Linda's made her choice, and now I have to make mine." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Your great-grandfather would be proud. Sometimes standing up for what's right means making tough choices." Tuesday morning arrived clear and cold, the kind of day that makes everything feel sharper and more defined. I arrived at the dam at 8 a.m. with Patricia, Frank, and a small group of media representatives who had been following the story. Linda was already there with her private security team, 3 sheriff's deputies, and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. She had positioned herself between me and the dam controls, like a desperate environmental custer making her last stand. "You will not pass," she declared to the gathering crowd, her voice dripping with desperation disguised as authority. "I am protecting this community from a dangerous individual who threatens our way of life." Channel 8 News had cameras set up, and the county sheriff himself had come to oversee what everyone knew would be the final showdown. Even some resort investors had driven down from Dallas, likely calculating how much money they were about to lose. I walked toward the concrete housing that concealed the bypass controls, carrying a folder filled with a century of legal documentation and Frank's official letter transferring dam operation authority to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd, my voice cutting through the morning air, "I'm here to perform routine maintenance on the secondary water management systems, which have been operated by my family since 1923. Linda stepped in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the pungent scent of panic sweat. "I have a federal restraining order preventing you from approaching this equipment," she said. Patricia smoothly stepped forward, handing a document to the sheriff. "Your Honor, that restraining order was superseded by federal water rights enforcement yesterday evening. Murdoch Morrison has full legal authority to operate these systems." The sheriff read the document carefully, nodded, and stepped aside. "Ma'am, he has federal jurisdiction here. You need to move back." That's when Linda completely lost it. "This is insane," she screamed at the cameras. "You're going to let this lunatic destroy a $4 million investment because of some piece of paper from 1923. People like him don't belong in our community." On live television, Linda had just revealed exactly what this battle had always been about: not HOA rules, not architectural standards, not community safety. It was about class. About who deserved to belong in her vision of an exclusive lakefront paradise. I knelt down beside the concrete housing and began removing the access panel with tools Frank had provided. Each bolt came loose with a metallic ring that seemed to mark the end of the fight. And I could hear the crowd holding its collective breath. "Mr. Morrison," called out a reporter from Channel 8, "can you explain what you're doing?" Linda asked. "I'm opening secondary flow channels designed by my great-grandfather in 1923, I replied, continuing my work without looking up. "These channels allow for controlled release of excess water during maintenance. Everything I'm doing is fully legal under federal water rights law and standard dam operations. As I worked, the access panel came loose, revealing the large brass wheel controlling the bypass valves. Frank had oiled the mechanism just the week before, and it turned with surprising ease, considering its age. Linda made one final attempt to stop me. "Sheriff, he's going to drain our lake. He's destroying private property. Arrest him." Sheriff Martinez gave her a long, patient look, the kind worn by someone who had dealt with too many HOA disputes. "Ma'am, this is federal jurisdiction and legal dam operation. I can't arrest someone for turning a valve they have legal authority to operate." I turned the wheel 3 full turns clockwise. Deep within the dam, the century-old mechanisms responded exactly as Samuel Morrison had designed them. A low, rumbling sound filled the air as water began to flow through the secondary channels. The crowd watched, captivated. As the lake level visibly dropped, within 20 minutes, you could see the water line receding from the resort stockpilings. Linda stood frozen, watching her $4 million investment literally drain away. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "You can't do this. You can't just destroy everything we've built." I stood, brushed the dirt from my hands, and turned to face the cameras for my final statement. "Mrs. Prescott, I offered you compromise. I offered negotiation. I offered respect for both your investment and my family's legacy. You chose war instead. This is what losing a water rights battle looks like." The resort's boat docks were already becoming unusable. By evening, the entire shoreline would be exposed mud. Linda's grand opening the following weekend was set to be a disaster. But the most beautiful sound wasn't the rushing water or the clicking cameras, it was Mrs. Chen's voice, clear and loud across the crowd. "Welcome home, Jake. Your great-grandfather would be proud." Monday morning, I drove to the county archives with a focused determination usually reserved for major engineering projects. Dorothy, a patient woman who'd worked there since the Carter administration, assisted me in pulling every document related to the 1923 dam construction. What I discovered changed everything. Buried in a file labeled Historical Water Management Lake Morrison System was the original construction contract, not only for the dam but for the entire water control infrastructure. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, wasn't just some farmer who built a bridge, he was the chief hydraulic engineer for the entire project. The key document was a water rights agreement dated March 15, 1923. In legal language that took me through reads to fully comprehend, it granted Samuel Morrison and his heirs perpetual secondary water rights, including flow management authority for Lake Morrison and its tributaries. Flow management authority. Those 3 words meant I didn't just have the right to use the water, I had the legal authority to control how much water stayed in the lake. The real bombshell, however, came next. The resort's bank loan documents, which were public records due to their county tax incentives, included performance clauses specifying that if the lake level dropped below 18 inches from full capacity for more than 72 hours, the entire $4 million loan would be called due immediately. 18 inches. I quickly did the math in my head. The lake was currently 22 inches below the spillway. If I opened the secondary channels my great-grandfather had designed, I could drop the water level another 18 inches in about 6 hours. The resort had already collected over $200,000 in deposits for its grand opening weekend weddings, corporate retreats, and fishing tournaments, all assuming they'd have a pristine lake for their events. Linda's family had personally invested $500,000 into the project, and her husband Rick had co-signed the loan, using their house as collateral. As I sat in the archive room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and bureaucratic dust, I realized that I was holding a powerful tool in this water rights battle. The moral weight of it hit me instantly. This wasn't just about Linda anymore. The resort employed 43 people: waitresses, groundskeepers, boat captains, and cleaning staff, most of whom were local residents who relied on those jobs. But Linda had made this personal. She'd tried to destroy something that represented for generations of my family's history. She'd misused community funds for personal gain. She pitted neighbors against one another and treated our small lake community like her personal kingdom. That afternoon, I walked around the old dam structure, examining it for the first time as an engineer rather than just a nostalgic grandson. The 1920s construction was brilliantly simple. Samuel Morrison had built manual bypass valves into the original design, hidden under layers of moss and rust, yet still fully functional. The irony was perfect. While Linda had spent months battling me over HOA architectural standards, she was sitting on top of a water system I could control with a few turns of a century-old valve wheel. That evening, I made a decision that would shape everything moving forward. I wouldn't use this nuclear option right away. Linda deserved one last chance to step back from the edge. One final opportunity to negotiate like reasonable adults instead of behaving like playground bullies. But if she continued to escalate and try to destroy my family's legacy, then Linda was about to learn that some wars aren't won by the side with the most expensive lawyers or the best development plans. Sometimes, they're won by the side that understands the physics of water and the weight of history. As I walked back to my cabin that evening, I felt an unusual calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't the underdog anymore. I wasn't the guy being pushed around by petty authority and bureaucratic intimidation. I was the guy who could drain their lake. The next morning, I started putting my team together. My first call was to Patricia Gomez, a water rights attorney from Austin who specialized in historical claims. Her reputation was well known. She'd successfully defended ranchers against corporate water grabs and knew Texas water law better than most judges. "Jake," she said after I explained the situation, "if your documentation is solid, you're not just holding a strong hand. You're holding a royal flush in a game where everyone else thinks they're playing checkers." Patricia agreed to take the case on contingency, which showed me how confident she was. She would drive up the next weekend to review the documents and assess our legal position. Next, I called Frank Wilson, the seasoned dam operator who had worked alongside men who learned the system from my great-grandfather. If anyone understood the mechanical workings of the water controls, it was him, I thought. "Your granddaddy was a smart man," Frank said over coffee at the diner. "He built redundancy into everything. These new folks at the resort don't even know those bypass channels exist. Haven't been used since the drought of '86. Frank agreed to walk me through the entire system and explain how the manual controls worked. More importantly, he confirmed that everything I wanted to do was not only legal but well within standard dam operation procedures. My team was growing. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had been my sole ally on the whole board, introduced me to Tom Rodriguez, a maintenance worker at the resort. Tom was caught in the middle. He needed his job, but he'd grown up fishing off my great-grandfather's bridge and understood what it meant to the community. "Most of us know Linda's bad news," Tom confided. "She treats the staff like servants and local contractors like dirt. But we can't afford to lose our jobs over principles." Sarah's sister Monica, a paralegal in Dallas, volunteered to help with research. Within 2 days, she had compiled a comprehensive file on Linda's financial irregularities and HOA violations. The evidence was damning. Linda had been effectively embezzling community funds for months. Here's what I learned about forming a legal strategy. Water rights attorneys often charge $300 per hour. But historical claims can be worth millions if you have the proper documentation. During her weekend visit, Patricia outlined our negotiation strategy. We would offer Linda a face-saving compromise. I keep my bridge. She gains architectural approval authority for all new construction. The resort gets guaranteed minimum water levels. And Linda gets to claim victory for preserving community standards, but we also prepared a contingency plan. If Linda refused to negotiate, I had the legal authority to enforce my water management rights. Patricia explained that this could involve routine maintenance of the secondary flow channels, which would release enough water to drop the lake level below the resort's loan trigger. The best part: the timing. Spring runoff season was coming to an end, meaning any water released wouldn't naturally replenish for months. By the time the lake refilled, the resort would have missed their entire summer season. Frank walked me through the mechanical process on a quiet Tuesday morning. The bypass valves were hidden under a concrete housing, blending into the original dam structure. Your granddaddy designed this so one man could operate it with basic tools, Frank explained. Turn the wheel clockwise, and water flows through the secondary channel. Turn it back, and the flow stops. I practiced until I could operate the system with my eyes closed. The wheel turned with surprising ease for something that hadn't been used in decades, a true testament to Samuel Morrison's engineering. We set a timeline. I'd give Linda one final chance to negotiate at the next HOA meeting, an offer that was clear and reasonable, made in front of witnesses. If she accepted, everyone would benefit. If she refused or escalated the situation, I would exercise my water rights. The following Monday, Monica had prepared all the documents we might need for media attention: property records, water rights certificates, evidence of Linda's financial misconduct, and a clear timeline showing her escalating harassment if this became public. We wanted the narrative to be crystal clear: reasonable homeowner versus corrupt HOA president. Sarah and I spent Sunday evening on the dock, watching the sunset turn the lake golden red. The sound of water gently lapping against the pilings was peaceful, but I could sense the change coming. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her fingers and breathed in the sweet evening air. Linda made this choice when she decided my family's legacy was disposable. I'm just making sure she understands the consequences. Tomorrow, Linda would have her final chance to end the war she started. After that, the lake would decide who truly had the power. It seemed Linda sensed something was coming. 3 days before the scheduled HOA meeting, I got a call from Patricia that made my coffee taste bitter. "Jake, they've hired Blackstone and Associates from Dallas. That's a $2,000 in our law firm that specializes in crushing property rights claims. They're serious about this fight." Blackstone had immediately filed motions challenging my water rights documentation, claiming the 1923 agreements were outdated and superseded by modern zoning law. They had also requested an emergency hearing to dissolve my injunction, arguing that I posed an environmental threat to the lake ecosystem. Linda's desperation was becoming more evident in other ways too. Word around town was that she'd been calling resort investors, spreading wild stories about terrorist threats and plans to sabotage the development. The paranoia was taking its toll. On Thursday evening, she called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was simple: declare me a clear and present danger to community safety and authorize any measures necessary to protect the resort investment. I walked into that meeting with Patricia and Frank, carrying a folder full of documents that could permanently end Linda's reign. The community center was thick with the smell of nervous sweat and cheap cologne. Linda's supporters had clearly been working overtime to fill the room with their allies. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up during the public comment period, "I'd like to present a final proposal to resolve this dispute." I spread my water rights documentation across the table, followed by the resort's loan agreements and evidence of Linda's financial irregularities. "I will keep my bridge as a historically protected structure. In return, I'll guarantee minimum water levels for resort operations and support architectural review for all new construction," I stated. The room fell into a heavy silence. You could almost hear Linda's mind racing as she processed what she was seeing. "This is extortion," she hissed finally. "You're threatening to destroy a $4 million investment because you can't follow basic community rules." Patricia rose smoothly. "Mrs. Prescott, my client isn't threatening anything. He's offering to guarantee your water supply in exchange for respecting his grandfathered property rights. This is called negotiation." Linda's face turned as red as a boiled lobster. "I don't negotiate with terrorists. This board will not be held hostage by environmental extremism." That's when Frank Wilson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Jake has legal authority over secondary water management that predates your development by 80 years. This isn't extremism, it's property law." The vote was quick and predictable. Linda's board rejected the compromise 6-2, with only Mrs. Chen and Mr. Patterson supporting the idea of negotiation. Linda seemed to think she had secured some sort of victory. "Mr. Morrison," she announced smugly, Your threats have no power here. This community will not yield to your intimidation tactics. As I walked out of that meeting, the crunch of gravel under my boots felt like the ticking of a countdown. Linda had been given every chance to resolve this reasonably. She chose escalation over common sense. The next morning, news came that confirmed Linda's desperation had reached a new level. Tom Rodriguez called me before dawn, his voice tense with concern. "Jake, you need to know Linda offered me $10,000 cash to sabotage the dam controls. She said it would look like an equipment failure, and you'd get blamed for the damage. $10,000. Linda's fear of losing control had pushed her from harassment to bribery and outright sabotage. "What did you tell her, Tom?" "I told her I'd think about it. Then I called the sheriff. They're opening an investigation. But I wanted you to know she's getting dangerous." That afternoon, Deputy Martinez paid me a visit. Linda had filed a new complaint, claiming I'd made specific terrorist threats against the dam and the resort. The deputy remained professional but clearly skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, I have to ask, have you made any statements about damaging the resort or threatening public safety?" I handed him copies of all my legal documentation and Patricia's contact information. "Deputy, everything I plan to do is fully legal under state water rights law. If Mrs. Prescott considers legal dam operations to be terrorism, that says more about her understanding of the law than about my intentions." After he left, I called Patricia to give her an update. Her response was swift and firm. "Jake, attempted bribery and false police reports cross a line. We're filing federal charges under water rights interference statutes. But more importantly, you need to act fast. If Linda's this desperate, she might try something illegal." That evening, I sat on my dock, watching the sunset and tasting the sharp edge of adrenaline. Linda had rejected negotiation, tried bribery, and filed false police reports. She had made her choice.